All right, so just some administrative stuff. My name is Lori Tagg. I'm the command historian for the the U.S. Army Intelligence Center of Excellence. The date is 26 April 2017, and I am here with Command Sergeant Major David Redmon, and I'm just going to read your title because it's so long I can't remember it.
Okay, ma'am.
So, Command Senior Enlisted Leader for U.S. Cyber Command and Senior Enlisted Advisor for the National Security Agency Central Security Service at Fort Meade, Maryland. So to begin with, let's talk about how and why you chose a career in the Army and how you chose your MOS. Can you talk about that?
You know, as a young kid growing up in Los Angeles, I didn't have any connection with the military. A few uncles who had served prior to being born. My brother had an interest in being an Air Force pilot, but it was never anything I had an interest in. I thought I wanted to be a musician, working in the studios in Hollywood and Burbank. But after dropping out of high school for a second time, I saw a flyer for the Army in a little publication. I'd seen stripes the year before, so I knew what the Army was all about. Sent that thing in, and a recruiter contacted me. I think given where I was in my high school career, wasn't too much interest, but he took a risk and took me over to the Marine Corps Air Station at Tustin to take the ASVAB. Once my test scores came back, there was a renewed interest in having the conversation. So he took me down into East Los Angeles, and they gave me the Defense Language Aptitude Battery and the Army Analysis Test. Clearly, test scoring and their need at the time was to look into the intel field. No discussions ever about branches or jobs at that particular point. They put in front of me 98 Juliet, which was this non-voice intercept MOS. They put voice collector and SIGINT analyst in front of me with a choice of 20 different languages. So the language thing is what was of interest to me since I had taken Spanish in high school. I had done a music tour through Europe at one particular point in time. So I sat down with the recruiter, and as I worked through deciding that language sounded pretty neat, he talked me out of doing the collector side. I don't think as an infantryman he had any knowledge beyond that. The guide to become a Czechoslovakian linguist was solely tied to this notion of where might you want to be assigned. So the logic of this infantryman was that if you took Russian, you would go worldwide. If you were Spanish, then that was a particular set of assignments. Czech, Polish, Bulgarian, in his mind, meant that I'd have a chance of being assigned in Europe if that was something I was interested in, since assignment options weren't something that were available at that point of the Cold War. So I signed up into the delayed entry program. It was November of '82, with the requirement that I go back and complete my high school diploma through an independent study program in my school district that the recruiter set up to do. So no, pretty powerful, you know, that the Army provides you an opportunity to get to a skill, but also guides you if you're a little bit wayward towards what you need to do. So I finished that, received my diploma while I was at basic training in March of '83. Showed up in the mail, so it was pretty cool. Made no conscious decision to go into intel other than this idea about learning a language at DLI sounded pretty neat.
Any regrets?
Not a one. I did get out after my first enlistment. I had married an Air Force gal that I met in advanced individual training at Goodfellow Air Force Base. She was same career field. She was a SIGINT analyst, being assigned to Key West, Florida, and I was a Czech linguist. So got out for my marriage, and then after a year out, the Army wrote a note and said, hey, come back in. Said, give me Key West, Florida. I'll work the Soviet Brigade in Cuba mission. And I came back in, and she got out a year later, and we haven't looked back ever since.
Describe some of the other assignments that you had prior to your current position at NSA and the U.S. Cyber Command.
I think I'm the perfect example of what happens when you let our personnel process execute the plan that the great team here at Fort Huachuca has set up for you. I was fortunate to go to a tactical formation for my first duty assignment. So working as part of 1st Armored Division, sitting along the Czechoslovakian border, working against an adversary protecting, Europe from the hordes of the adversary coming across the Iron Curtain was a pretty exciting place to start as a young soldier. After coming back into the service, it was my opportunity to do my first INSCOM kind of fixed facility assignment down at Field Station Key West. It was right after the CONUS MI group had gone away and we established the 704th MI Brigade. So I think I was the third person assigned to the 741st MI Battalion with duty in Key West, Florida. Great opportunity to see this connection between the agency and what we do in each of the military services. So counter-drug missions and the Soviets and the Cubans and all of the things. Being there for the last U-2 flight over Cuba where the plane, flies over the site and tips its wings to say thanks for helping us work through our missions over the years. Some pretty neat things. Spent 6 years down in Key West. After I'd come back in, the Army lost track of me, so the Naval Security Group Activity Key West took control of me for the last 2.5 years I was there, and I served as an NSA system administrator, working systems work. After that, got promoted to Sergeant First Class and moved off to the 5th Corps ACE in Frankfurt. Great opportunity to at that next echelon. I'd worked division level before in 1st Armored Division. This time was, how do you put all of that together? We were in preparations for Bosnia, so we were setting up a facility in Hungary. It's this great convergence of taking a SIGINT skill and tactically integrating that with all of the other ints for an all-source product for the Corps commander. Became part of USER Forward as they were preparing for operations in Bosnia. After getting to serve at that particular echelon, I followed my battalion commander out to Fort Huachuca. I served in the Battle Command Battle Laboratory here, played on some of my systems work from early in my career and opportunities to start IEW TPT. We built the Common Ground Station. We were doing division advanced warfighting exercises with the rest of the Army, working through what our analytic capability was going to be that supported that. And then at the tail end of my tour here, did modeling and simulations and working most of our exercise things that we were building here into the schoolhouse. Got selected for Master Sergeant here, which meant it was time to move. Went back to 1st Infantry Division to be a First Sergeant in 101st MI Battalion. Just fantastic. It was months before K4 1 Bravo. So deployed as a First Sergeant very early in my leadership time back in an infantry unit, going off to Kosovo. Camp Bondsteel was a time when we were moving from tents into fixed facility buildings and really starting to shape the aftermath of the bombing campaign that had been done to prepare. Great opportunity for an MI professional to lead in a tactical experience, and you'll see that a little bit further in my career. When I left there, went to INSCOM, really again for the first time since Key West, to the 204th MI Battalion in El Paso. So aerial reconnaissance operations in Colombia was their primary mission at the time, and just did that for 1.5 years till I made Sergeant Major and stayed there in El Paso to go to Sergeant Major school. At Sergeant Major course at that time, they allowed you to jot down a list of where you think you might want to go. It really was the only time in my career I was ever asked for my opinion on what I might want to do. So I wrote down what I thought, what would be the most challenging thing that no one else wants to do. And I wrote down 10th Mountain Division, Fort Drum, New York. And as a SIGINTer, the only job you could go to as a Sergeant Major at the time was to be the G2 Sergeant Major. Play on my tactical experiences from earlier in my career. And as the G2 Sergeant Major at 10th Mountain, absolutely phenomenal opportunity in a unit that's deploying all of the time. We were doing preparations for Afghanistan to take General Austin and the headquarters back to Afghanistan. Shortly before deployment, Division Sergeant Major came and said, hey, I want to put you down in 1st Brigade and I'm going to shift your focus to Iraq. So I got the chance to be the first Sergeant Major for the 1st Brigade Special Troops Battalion. My predecessor had transitioned it, and then I moved in shortly thereafter and took the 1st Brigade Special Troops Battalion, first fully transformed one, to Iraq in 2005. 83 different MOSs across many, many branches, just the opportunity to be able to show what MI leaders can do in an infantry brigade. We had downtown Baghdad from the river to Abu Ghraib, 6 million Iraqis in our sector. We didn't have security force assistance teams at the time. We did that ourselves with our Iraqi partners. It was in that period post Abu Ghraib. So the challenges before the surge in Baghdad were pretty neat. Professionally rewarding. No one likes being separated from home, but it really became then what defined me within the MI Corps. I would get invited to Fort Huachuca to talk about tactical analysis and tactical MI professionals and what special troops battalions were and how you provide time-sensitive intelligence to support the commander at that particular echelon. And I think from that point, everyone would see the 10th Mountain patch on my right sleeve, and that was how I was defined for many years, was that, that was the guy that went to 10th Mountain Division. Coming out of 10th Mountain Division, I was selected to join Colonel Walter at the 205th MI Brigade, and before we had a chance to move off to that assignment, it was shut down. It closed early. The consolation for Sergeant Major Redmon was getting to go be the 66th MI Brigade Sergeant Major in Darmstadt, Germany. So back into INSCOM, theater level support for USER commander. Completely different echelon from all of my other jobs. Spent 2 years there working through support to USER. Became the INSCOM Sergeant Major after that. Spent 3 years with General Legere at Fort Belvoir, taking that theater capability as we worked to realign the Army towards this regional concept that we had moved to. After INSCOM, an opportunity presented itself to apply to go work at the NATO training mission or Combined Joint Interagency Task Force 435. The latter is where I went with Lieutenant General Huber, working detentions and rule of law. So all of the detention collection, all of the detainees from the tactical formation all the way to the facility in Bagram were part of the organization. And then the training of the Afghan judicial system from the districts to the Supreme Court. Imagine a formation where you have 250 lawyers in your formation. Just an excellent opportunity. I replaced a Navy SEAL, so this wasn't an MI job. It was an opportunity to learn what leadership is in a combat environment at the most senior levels. The camaraderie that existed between all of the 3-star commands and General Allen and General Dunford up at the ISAF level was an exposure and a glimpse into how we fight as a department in a joint way that I don't think I could have gotten from any other experience. Because those are only 1-year jobs, General Legere asked me to come back and join her at the Army G2. So I spent a year and a half in the Army G2 learning a skill set that has served me well in my current job. How to work with the very civilian workforce, how to interact with Congress, what's the budgeting cycle, how do you align resources to meet training and operational requirements. We do well in training our officer corps to have those joint experiences. It's part of law. This notion if you're going to be a general officer, you have to have some joint experience. That's not the same for the senior NCO Corps. So when Sergeant Major of the Army Chandler was the Sergeant Major of the Army, he wanted to change the population of sergeants majors that served in those staff positions. So Sergeant Major Bryant Lambert from 82nd Airborne and myself, we went into the G3 and the G2 and worked through trying to bring some field experience and change what the dynamic was for senior enlisted participation. As you know, within all of the services, we work through a model of Council of Colonels and General Officer Steering Committee meetings in order to prep things for senior leader discussions. There's no part of that says Sergeant Major. So it's how do you figure out how to invite yourself to the right meetings, to have the influence and say what needs to be said without being threatening. It's transitioning from a very direct leadership style to an indirect one. And while at the time I thought it was a misery drill traveling from Fort Belvoir, the Pentagon every day. Looking back, so developmental, and I'm very thankful to General Legere for partnering again to give me that opportunity. And that's where Admiral Rogers found me and selected me for my current position. You know, it's kind of a long dissertation on what my career history is, but I do try and tell NCOs it's about selfless service and not trying to guide what your next assignment is. I'm absolutely convinced that the moment you start trying to control where you go is the moment you start limiting the possibilities that the Army can provide for you. I just let it all happen. You know, you do the best with the job you got at any one time, and the Army guides you to that next assignment.
So looking back at all of your assignments, which of those did you find the most challenging?
So the most challenging has to be my current position. Having two full-time jobs, being the Sergeant Major for both U.S. Cyber Command and NSA, is a very, very challenging assignment. The National Security Agency's 62-ish years old. It's a large organization with a very senior workforce. You know, it's a member of the IC, and at the same time, it also falls as a combat support agency under the Secretary of Defense. There's a personality that's associated with that. If you have so many senior leaders, you know, it's how do you influence, how do you help guide the organization to have long-term effect? And it's usually by convincing everyone that the ideas that you have for inclusion are theirs, you know, and it's just developing relationships slowly over time. I've learned to value a bureaucracy. The great civilian cohort at NSA and the technical expertise they have, I wished I'd have been assigned to the headquarters earlier in my career. I'm convinced that part of the reason I got hired is because I hadn't. But at the same time frame, I would have been a better cryptologist earlier in my career if I had spent some time at a large cryptologic center or at the headquarters. I really would have. So there's a personality that's associated with the agency. U.S. Cyber Command, 7 years old, starting to put repeatable processes into place. It's acting like a 4-star command now. That's just an evolution as time goes on. There are mutual dependencies between NSA and Cyber Command. And because of that, it's not the time to split the two organizations yet. But it means that all of the friction associated with a normal joint command and an intelligence organization relies on the command team, because we're the only two in both organizations, to work through solving pretty serious conflict. So every single problem I usually get to try and solve, a general or a very senior leader has taken a swing at it already. So there's just no easy problems. All of them are hard. So it's rewarding at the same time. I think there's great fun in being challenged each and every day. I don't have any one day that's the same. So it's fun, but it clearly is the most challenging.
Listening to you talk about all of your assignments, you talk about them with a lot of enthusiasm. Was there one that was particularly rewarding or your favorite assignment?
If you would let me go back to Fort Drum, New York, I would go back tomorrow. Okay. So everyone asks, you spent 12 years in Europe in your career. Why wouldn't it be one of those? Fort Drum as an installation and 10th Mountain as an organization had a sense of camaraderie that's unmatched anything else I've ever found. 1st Infantry Division maybe being the next closest. The moment you put on this keg patch, it's instant acceptance. Doesn't matter what your background or branch is. One of the things MI professionals will always say is I always feel like I'm not an active participant with my maneuver counterparts. You don't feel that at Fort Drum. The patch defines you, and as long as you're willing to be a high performer, you stay as part of that club. The way that they take care of families given their deployment tempo is very active. It encourages folks to stay on the installation, be together when deployments happen. When you get tens of feet of snow every year and the service members deployed, you spend hours snow plowing out the families of the folks that are gone. That's just what the organization does. So I found a camaraderie. It's also added with this notion of my favorite job was probably a battalion sergeant major. It's the last time you really have hands-on direct leadership. The moment you start being a brigade sergeant major, it's this transition to leading through other leaders. So the last time you really feel that personal, or that I did, at an intense level and with a deployment was that particular duty assignment.
Can you describe some of the training that you received as a 98 Charlie?
So during my first duty assignment, I got to go to NSGA Edsel in Scotland and take a National Cryptologic School course called ISO 70. So it was operational ELINT and fusion reporting. We were playing with this notion of taking operational ELINT and moving it into the 98 Charlie MOS, something we did later officially, but early off in the game it was taking folks in a tactical formation who were SIGINT analysts and giving them that additional skill. Also during that tour was a very liberal use of live environment training. So sitting at Detachment Wobeck, right up at the Helmstedt Autobahn on the border with East Germany, learning how to do collection against the group of Soviet forces, Germany. I often find it interesting. I had this chat with my kids, and I started talking more about what I was doing, and they go, "Dad, why are you sharing this?" The declassification dates for what I did, which at the time are 25 years down the road, have all lapsed from my first duty assignments, which is pretty neat. So many of the listening posts along the Czechoslovakian border and the East German border, we spent a lot of time, and that was training for us. It was live environment training within our MOS, really refining our skill and our knowledge of those particular adversaries. The next time I had I'd call an MOS opportunity, was going to the Foreign Language Training Center in Europe to take a Czech follow-on course. That year was 1994. Those are the only two MOS training that I had in my entire career. Formal training.
Doesn't your bio say that you had AIT at Goodfellow?
Right. So just your normal AIT and NCO development courses, those are part of things you do. But any additive training to refine MOS skill in the institutional domain, that was it.
So how would you compare some of the training that you received with the training that our soldiers get today?
So it's a 35 November today.
That's right.
So we've transitioned a lot on how we deliver training given OEF and OIF. I think there was a period where we shifted a lot of the things we would train in a unit in the past into the institutional domain because we needed to be able to deploy that young service member pretty shortly after their arrival at a unit. I didn't feel I missed any technical training opportunity early in my career. The ability of units to train, my platoon sergeant was an expert in the career field. All of those unit level training tasks, he trained me on and certified me on every single task associated with my job specialty. We in the units believed that was our responsibility. So when you became a sergeant, it was your job to train the specialists, 4th class and below at the time, in their trade and prepare them to move up. That has transitioned a lot. I think the ability of units to train isn't as powerful as it was before. So today we give more technical training delivered by others, whether it's INSCOM's delivery through the Foundry program, greater MTTs out of the schoolhouse, but it's a replacement for what I felt for the majority of my career, which were unit training responsibilities. So while it sounds like I didn't get much training, the training was in the unit rather than in formal courses or institutional.
So how did working in a joint environment differ from working in a solely Army environment?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this notion of we don't prepare sergeant majors to work in a joint environment very much. So It becomes readily apparent when we do senior enlisted promotions, and the NCOs that are serving in joint formations who are very talented don't get promoted. So we do have a culture problem within the Army that predisposes you to have a particular view of joint when you go into your first joint assignment. I think what I found different in the joint environment is a greater appreciation for the diversity of experiences. The Army is a very regimented, hierarchical organization where conformity to a singular way of doing things is generally what makes you the most successful. Within the joint environment, it's this notion of everyone comes in with different experiences and backgrounds. I made a bunch of early failures trying to get all of the soldier, sailor, airman, marine, and Coast Guardsmen to have a singular identity, to try and conform to a single way of doing business. Not necessarily the Army way, but this notion of we need to judge and measure our identity based on how alike we are. And that was my assignment out in Afghanistan with CGI at 435. By the time I finished that year tour, completely different view. General Dunford and I had talked about this before, that it shouldn't be about trying to make everyone purple. It's about finding the right individuals to bring diverse experiences into an environment to solve some really complex problems for the nation. If you surround yourself with diversity, traditional diversity and service culture diversity, then you get lots of potential solutions and recommendations to solve a problem. It's that difference that we all look and act differently in the joint environment that really sets it apart from some of the culture within my particular service, which becomes singular sometimes. So it's always forcing and reminding yourself that it's the value of each individual. Each service has different strengths. So how do you take the strengths that are represented with the highly technical nature of the Air Force, with very technical NCOs, and merge that with the planning and mission development processes that the Army has, with some of the emotion and experiences that exist in the Navy, with the warfighter spirit of the Marine Corps, and the DHS environment that the Coast Guard brings in, and find the best parts of that to solve a solution that you wouldn't get at if you had just one service. I've gotten much better at realizing, it's how do you harness all of that rather than trying to control it. So to that point in the MI Corps, the view had always been it was your job to know all of the skills and all of the tasks for your subordinate folks. You needed to be able to operate all the equipment that existed and be able to demonstrate and train them in those each individual skills. So how do you do that when you have an infantry platoon, a chemical platoon, an MP platoon, a combat engineer company that also has an earth-moving section, a signal organization, and an MI company? So you throw all of that together along with all of the staff functions of logistics and personnel. Do you have the ability as the Sergeant Major to demonstrate every task at every skill level for those? Very quickly, the answer is no, you can't. So you become very reliant on identifying aptitude and capability in the NCOs that work for you. Sometimes that's the first sergeant of the combat engineer company. Sometimes maybe it's a young sergeant who can step on a bulldozer and move earth in a tactical way. So it's having to lead through subordinate NCOs and still have credibility with those individual soldiers. So you get really good at showing the right amount of interest. You develop how to be a humble leader, recognizing that that young specialist in that particular skill knows more than you do. So how do you harness that in a way that allows you to move forward? Very, very similar, you're correct, as you take a look at the joint environment. And you can't know it all when you're a battalion sergeant major in a special troops battalion.
Was it hard not to show some favoritism towards the MI guy?
So I think you always have a tendency to do the opposite with that you know best. My trip out to Fort Huachuca to talk through some of the signal things with NetCom came after showing attention to the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps first. I think my tendency has been, oh, I know the Army part, and pay less attention and maybe be a little less favorable to the Army because I think I know it, which isn't the case. I learned as much by visiting my signal teammates here as I did by visiting a comm squadron or net op squadron in the Air Force. So no, my tendency I think was to do the reverse, was to be a little tougher on the MI folks in that Special Troops Battalion than everybody else, because I was learning in those other areas and probably gave less time to working through decisions with the MI company.
Do you have any specific examples where military intelligence played a key role in an operation?
So part of our task that ended up settling in that the brigade commander in 1st Brigade, 10th Mountain gave us as a Special Troops Battalion is we were responsible in great part for the counter-IED mission. It was a time where the adversary was doing a lot of damage against U.S. forces in Baghdad. Capabilities that they were getting that we didn't have defenses for. So the MI company really then became how do you develop a set of trends? Where do you find where the adversary is going to emplace IEDs? With the weapons intelligence team that was part of our organization, we were able to, from an intel perspective, figure out how the adversary would target and some of the capabilities used to trigger some of the IEDs. So Intel drove us towards some solutions that in the end became this Rhino thing that was out, a heat sensor out in front of a maneuver vehicle, came from an MI company's review of adversary tactics and procedures in a way that allowed us to protect U.S. service members. Pretty darn cool to connect from collection. So it's then employing your human resources and your SIGINT capabilities to find IED manufacturing centers, taking commanders' information gaps, identifying what capabilities you have from an intel perspective to close those gaps. And then if you can connect all of the dots, it really allows Intel to drive operations and achieve outcomes that you couldn't if you hadn't gone through that very deliberate process.
Describe your personal philosophy on management and leadership.
You know, my leadership view is one that you have to exercise a large amount of humility and realize that it's not about you. You know, it really is about the folks that you serve. It does become more difficult as folks pay attention to, hey, you're in particular assignments, or in my case where I can't seem to retire and someone always asks me to do something different. Still realizing that it is about that young soldier that makes it all work. Too many NCOs try to shape their assignments or have a career path that they control. It's about taking the part of the Army that we give you, doing the best you can with it. I think one of the quotes I got quoted from my time here at Huachuca is, you know, do the best you can and all the rest will follow. You know, work hard and things just logically derive from there. When I give a speech for PLDC or Warrior Leader Course or Basic Leader Course or any graduation thing of NCOs, I do have my one, it's the dead guy quote, right? Mine's always President Kennedy's from his second inaugural. And I add into every single speech somewhere near the end, and it says that courage, not complacency, is our need today. Leadership, not salesmanship. So it's not about all of those things when you look at salesmanship where you're trying to influence by favor or be nice. You know, leadership's about helping young Americans realize what they need, not what they want. And the best way you can take care of a subordinate is to provide for their needs over their wants. And in the end, when they look back, they will realize that you shaped them to survive in combat, to accomplish things that they never thought they could. At the time, you're often resented for, not being as coddling. We pick up where the parents of America leave off. When you think about that responsibility in the NCO Corps, that's pretty powerful, and that expectation hasn't changed in forever. You inculcate a skill into that young American, and then you return him to society better than you found him. So that's kind of the core contract I think I have with the parents of America. Many NCOs say it's harder to lead today than it was before. I'd argue the only real change is the speed of communication. When you put all those devices together, things flow communication-wise a lot faster. But that basic expectation hasn't changed at all. So you bend your knees a little bit further to pick it up, and then you kind of move forward. So you can't forget why we're here. And the NCO that really starts down the path towards failure is the one who starts to make it about themselves.
What have been your major contributions and your major accomplishments throughout your career?
As I put some thought in it before we got a chance to talk, if I had to say, what did Dave Redmon do to help advance the MI Corps, during my 35 years? I really think it's this notion that the MI Corps, more than any other in this OEF, OIAF period, has progressed further. We have improved leaps and bounds ahead of where we started in ways that our maneuver community tells us. And part of that's becoming active leaders within the Army. During the Cold War period, you would often see officers and NCOs who were viewed as, well, that's the analyst. That's the intel guy who's going to provide something. Now there are senior MI leaders serving in senior positions in our Army. The JSOC Sergeant Major is an MI professional. The USER Sergeant Major is an MI soldier. So when you think about that and some of the things that have occurred, I think I've helped us get to that particular point. I find myself, when I get introduced, being told I'm the senior intel person in the Army. I think it's more flattering when I'm described as one of the seniors in the Army rather than as an intel person, because it's been about how have we become active participants in this service. I worry about going back to a time when the intel professional was just seen as the analyst, because there's great value within our branch. And that's what I've tried to do by taking whatever job or assignment you seem to want to give me, whether it's MI or not, to kind of further that view that intel folks can serve alongside anybody else in any environment, anywhere in the world, and lead from the front and excel regardless of what our occupational specialty is.
What have been your major challenges throughout your career, and not just in military intelligence, but in the Army overall?
The greatest challenge has been this notion of balancing your personal life and your military life. Biggest challenge was losing a son to cancer at 21 while being the INSCOM Sergeant Major, and trying to balance all of the emotions and things and stay focused. And you find in the Army an ability to find the right camaraderie and things to keep you going. Challenges have always been this notion of personal development conflict against the military one. The challenge of getting a bachelor's and a master's degree while you're still serving, working through adversity in your personal life. The Army prepares you exceptionally well for the military challenges that you get. The civilian challenges come from living. So, I tell first sergeants and sergeant majors that try and hide their personal challenges from their subordinates that they're not helping them at all. The young soldier needs to see that their first sergeant is on their third wife or husband, and is working through the struggles of how to do child support across 3 time zones or try and provide that. That's the challenge of military service that we don't talk enough about. So when you ask what the greatest challenge is, I don't think any of my military ones were insurmountable given what the Army prepared me to do. So the level of what you can impact the more senior you get is part of that equation. So as an MI professional, getting to compete for Sergeant Major of the Army, appearing in front of that board where the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army is the president, that's pretty exciting and something I will look back on as, wow, I got to do that. Getting ready to knock on the door to walk into that board, thinking all the way back to my sergeant's board in 1986, thinking, what in the world am I doing here? You know, why did I sign up to do this? Having more than 30 years of experience, feeling like a young kid worried about how well I was going to perform again. Allowing me to serve as part of the 17 most senior enlisted folks in the Department of Defense. There's a lot of impact that you can make if you don't forget what your roots were, still stay humble to those that you serve. You can make great impact. So I can't really compare things that I did hands-on at the battalion level with what I'm doing now, because the accomplishments often are level of responsibility, you know, combined with level of performance. So if you're performing well, then the delineator always becomes what that level of responsibility. I guess I'm also proud of the fact that under this new construct in the agency, I do get to serve on the board of directors, which for an enlisted person is pretty cool. You know, everyone else is an SES or a general or a flag officer. So it's only me representing the needs of 13,000 enlisted folks in the formation. That's a pretty weighty responsibility in that you're the only one that comes from that environment. You know, everyone wants to be you at some point in that, which, you know, is a lot of pressure every day when you show up at work. So because you have that, those become great accomplishments just because of the level of responsibility that you get to perform at. I did finish my master's degree 3 days ago.
Oh, congratulations.
While doing these 2 jobs. To me, that's a pretty cool accomplishment. I often tell my officer counterparts, you know, I graduated summa cum laude for my undergrad. I had a 4.0 for my master's. Probably better than most of the GPAs of my officer counterparts while doing a full-time job. Admiral Rogers and I were in Afghanistan, and we finished a meeting at 1 o'clock in the morning. He heads over to a system to work on email. I head over to the MWR tent to take a final exam. You know, thinking, so that there's lots of contributions or achievements that cross this personal, professional boundary, that if I measure the greatest challenge is in making those work, those 2 things that can come in conflict, then many of my greatest achievements are in my ability to try and make some of that work to the best that I can.
Who have been your mentors throughout your career?
So 2 types of mentors. The first types of mentors are those that are expected to occur, supervisor to subordinate within any of our formations. So first mentor has to be, you know, Sergeant First Class James Kelly, my platoon sergeant in 1st Armored Division. Technically competent, a leader, operationally focused, who taught me my skill set when I got to my first duty assignment. You know, so that supervisor in my direct NCO chain absolutely provided that foundation. Key West was a first sergeant. When I got out to the 5th Corps Ace, it was the Satoxi Sergeant Major Steve Peck. Very similar in the NCO support channel. You pick those that, as a subordinate, you want to emulate very early in your career. Generally, you'll find someone that's a couple of echelons up. You know, your first line supervisor may not be the best because they haven't figured out how to get to their next part. So if you're working at the 2 echelons down as you're mentoring someone, or where you're looking for a mentor in your environment, you're looking a couple of echelons up to do that. After leaving Fifth Corps and heading here to the schoolhouse was the first time my mentor switched to being my officer counterpart. Lieutenant Colonel Al Boyd, who had been my battalion commander in Germany, became my boss here at Fort Huachuca in the Battle Lab. He treated me the same way he mentored the captain's career course. He made me read. He challenged me in ways that I never had been challenged, because he saw and had experienced as a battalion commander. I was in E7 at the time, so he was trying to translate what he thought his responsibility was to me, and I look upon that, and I still use him as someone to bounce ideas off of. I only see him once every few years, but I still value being able to share something with him and get something back from that formation. My first lifelong mentor was when I was a first sergeant out at 1st Infantry Division. My battalion sergeant major was Command Sergeant Major Richard Walker. He's the one that taught me this: it's about what the organization needs, not what it wants, stupid. When I do an NCO DP, I talk about my great failure early as a first sergeant. Right before deploying to Kosovo, I'd seen every movie. I was convinced that Clint Eastwood was right. You had to be Billy Joe Badass to be a company first sergeant. I think you've already figured out that's not Dave Redmon's most effective leadership style. And I shut the company down really right before we deployed. And he had me apologize to the company team, 400 folks, describing what are you doing wrong? I don't think he knew the full extent of that, but he really taught me how to make hard decisions. And I used him as a permanent mentor then outside of my organization as I progressed. And I can remember vividly the day I came to him. He was the 902nd Sergeant Major at the time at Fort Meade, and I went to him for my regular advice session. And he told me that I needed to figure that out on my own. I had transitioned from being a battalion to a brigade sergeant major, and he knew what I needed was to no longer provide particular levels of advice. And I thought that was pretty powerful. And I see him from time to time, but kind of a lifelong mentor. At the senior levels, the mentors are more about finding folks that you confide in that benefit the organization as much as they benefit you. So relationships with Sergeant Major Borja at 10th Mountain Division, where he's the division sergeant major. You're trying to work through how you support the maneuver folks. General Legere is my partner for 4.5 years, taught me more than probably anybody else. So a mentor. I like to think that I mentored her also along the way, and it became a two-way partnership, a pretty powerful relationship. Lieutenant General Huber was a Special Forces officer that I worked for in Afghanistan. He taught me a level of moral decision-making, how it's all about being able to look yourself in the mirror and keeping the high ground each and every day in a very tough environment where everyone wants you to violate the law, detention operations. It really is, well, that's unfair saying everyone wants you to violate the law. Pressures to cut corners, just in the nature of how things are configured is a better way to put it. And you work through, how do you do the right thing knowing that the Red Cross may come visit tomorrow? It's just this strong moral compass I got from General Huber in a really powerful way. And I've maintained that with my officer partner. I did find senior maneuver folks, Sergeant Major of the Army Chandler, whom I think he and I didn't have a good start when I was at INSCOM and he became the Sergeant Major of the Army. By the time I went up to be one of his Sergeant Majors, and upon his retirement, I considered him a valuable mentor. He described for me what was important. He taught me the humility of taking off the wreath of Command Sergeant Major and being a Staff Sergeant Major again on the Army staff. Something within our Army culture was unheard of at the time, but both myself and Sergeant Major Lambert over in the 3 for Sergeant Major Chandler helped describe this notion of it's not about what you're wearing, it's about what you do for the organization. So to this day, I will send a note or two and let them know how I'm doing. I guess the last that helped guide me through some period of time was Sergeant Major Joe Paul. I followed him at the 66 in Germany and at INSCOM, and he provided kind of a framework and an idea of what right looked like, more from his demonstrated actions than anything he would ever tell me. You know, watching him. So some about mentorship is just watching people. All of these other relationships that weren't direct supervisor, subordinate, fall in this category where mentorship has to be signed up for. Both the person who wants to be mentored and the person who wants to mentor have to enter into that relationship willing. You can't have someone that says, I'm going to mentor you. I had one of those battalion sergeant majors one time. He ended up getting himself in trouble and leaving the service. I didn't sign up for that mentor relationship. So that's kind of active mentorship. But how much do you also learn from watching others and saying, that's not what I want to emulate? So that's kind of a one-way mentorship thing. You watch and you're learning from a particular individual about what you don't want to do or what you don't want to emulate. And we don't describe that in any of our doctrine. It's all about how do you find positive mentors, where do you find that? But you learn as much from watching people make mistakes, saying, oh, I can learn from that mistake. Why do I need to repeat that particular failure in order to solve that problem? So part of it is that self-mentorship. Maybe that's called self-mentorship. I never thought of it that way before.
How have perceptions of military intelligence changed within the Army over the course of your career?
So I think I've alluded to during the OEF, OIF period how much we have grown in being more responsive to what the commander needs. It's hard to ask someone that question because you're not senior enough for long enough to make that comparison. Our officer corps gets to have that visibility from the moment they're a lieutenant. You know, you're exposed to the commander very early. The first time I ever got to see anything resembling commander's intent was as a sergeant first class in 5th Corps, right? So you don't, my time on target to be able to make long-term comparisons aren't as great. How much we're limited by our ability to understand collection, how we manage that, how we satisfy a commander's needs, I think all have an impact on how we are perceived within an organization. You could argue that the way you measure our value is to see how well our military officers are evaluated against their maneuver counterparts, but I think the rules are different. So that's not a good way to measure that. I use seeing where there are intel people to give me a sense of how well we're respected organizationally. So I've kind of shown you where I think I'm seeing, at least in the NCO Corps, military intelligence professionals who are serving in non-intel jobs. That's my best indicator of we're doing fine. We're moving in the right direction. Things we would have never been allowed to do before because we were MI, we can do now. So yeah, my time horizon I don't think is long enough to give you a good qualitative analysis on how we've progressed. Every commander has a different view of intel based on how they grew up. Spend 10, 15 minutes with a division or corps commander and you can very quickly tell what their relationship was with their S2 or their G2 to date. It's every maneuver commander one at a time that you have to influence. And when I watched INSCOM bring in division commanders before deployments to try and level those bubbles, it was the closest I saw to trying to achieve some level of commonality across the maneuver community. But we will always be evaluated through the lens of the maneuver commander. So time and patience spent with maneuver commanders is never wasted time.
What is your current evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of the Military Intelligence Corps?
So let me keep it to my lane in the NCO Corps. Maybe some will spread a little broadly. I measure us based in 3 areas. So my voting philosophy on a promotion board, or what I will tell the folks in the auditorium today for NCODP, is I really am looking for 3 things within a leader in the MI Corps. I'm looking for traditional leadership ability. I'm looking for operational experience and the ability to achieve outcomes. And I'm also looking for technical acumen. And I'm convinced that if you're weak in one of those areas, then you're not well-rounded, and we can be fairly choosy in who we select for promotion. Over the course of Iraq and Afghanistan, I think our NCO Corps technically isn't as strong as it could be, where each of the services view the senior technical grade with any career field is an E7. So for us, a sergeant first class. Should be an absolute technical expert leading day-to-day operations in our formations. My observation is that has slipped to staff sergeant a little bit, and that we've needed our warrant officer corps to move down into some of the NSA, or into some of the NCO technical space. So what was my task as a sergeant first class is now a warrant officer task today. I think we need to get all of us more technically proficient than we have been previously. Not every assignment gives you the ability to learn in each of these 3 legs and develop in the same way. Our leadership abilities, a criticism for the MI force that's not our fault, or it is this notion that we don't have traditional leadership opportunities for a lieutenant colonel and a sergeant major in a division anymore. I worry as an intel professional that saw that as one of our paramount leadership activities and able to develop. Doesn't exist anymore since the MI battalion went away, or since the special troops battalions went away and there wasn't access for a lieutenant colonel or a sergeant major to lead a battalion in a maneuver brigade. We don't have another means to replace that. The next closest thing is in our core MI units, so 525, 504th, 201st up at Fort Lewis. So the three core locations. That does allow for some tactical leadership, but I do worry, and I'm starting to see the signs, Dave Redmon's opinion, that we're starting to atrophy a little bit in our leading with maneuver folks at a very low tactical level in the Army. You know, we've relegated much of our intel contribution leadership to a young company commander and first sergeant in an MI company, with the help of a brigade S2 and the division G2 and sergeant major, but we don't have the same level of support there. The thing I miss the most from the MI battalion is the S3 shop. What that major always provided in the way of training management, operations focus, those are skills that we have to learn. So I think my criticism is we can't move too far in that particular direction. I think we have lots of operational opportunities, strategic down to tactical, and we're not atrophying in that center leg too much. But technical and leadership, I think we're going to have to be attentive to make sure that we raise our cognitive abilities to support the commander, and at the same time we're also ensuring that we don't lose any of our warfighter edge as members of the Army. My drill sergeant told me this is Uncle Sam ain't released me yet. So it's this notion of, you got to keep leaning in to being part of the Army. You've seen, if I could talk about cyber a little bit, you've seen this desire to say we have to change our military standards to be able to accommodate and gain technical skills to be able to do some things in the cyber domain. That's not what the operational commander needs. We absolutely need folks who are Marines first, soldiers first, airmen first, sailors first, because they bring a particular mindset to achieving operational objectives that I don't get from our great civilian cohort. So the cyber mission force is 80% military, 20% civilian. for a reason. Each of those cohorts brings something different into that environment. And if I have this notion that you can't go off and go to a leadership school because your technical skills will atrophy, we don't necessarily agree with that in the operational environment. You need to be able to do both. And I think we sell ourselves short in the MI Corps if we also follow that notion that says it's all about our technical ability. No, it's about how you use that technical ability to apply that on the battlefield to achieve objectives, and you can't do that without leadership ability. So there are some concerns. We are leaps and bounds ahead of where we were, I think, on 9/11. Absolutely, and I don't want to see us retrograde. I want to see us continue to grow and get better at it.
What advice would you give to soldiers today trying to get leadership positions in the Army?
It's always about taking that piece of the Army we give you and doing absolutely your best for that part of the Army. When I look at any NCO to see if they're demonstrating the potential for greater responsibility at the next grade, I look at how well their organizations are doing, but I also look within the context of their next higher headquarters. Is it at the expense of their platoon or company on their left or right? And if it is, then they haven't figured it out yet. So it's how do you have the best squad, platoon, company, or battalion in the Army, and so is your sister organization. When you can connect all of those dots, that's the point that you're demonstrating the capability to move on to the next one. So you see, it's about partnerships. It's about staying focused on the mission we give you. It's not looking at the next promotion. It really is having some faith that the Army will promote you if you do your current task to the best of your ability and you excel. You know, if you can do your current job, we're going to promote you. And you just have to have this mindset. If you get sidetracked by trying to shape or treat the advanced leader course as a game and check a block and how do I get through that, that's not the answer. You know, it's how do you take advantage of what you are asked to do at that particular moment in time. And it's easy to have these wild dreams, and you should have dreams, but it shouldn't get in the way of performing at whatever task you've got, and do the best you can for those great Americans that work for you. If it's 3 or it's 400 or if it's 120,000.
In your opinion, what sets the MI soldier apart from other soldiers in the Army?
So I asked myself that question when I saw it a little bit differently. I asked it from the perspective of how are you trying to explain to the maneuver community why MI is different, right? Because it's about how do we show value for our maneuver counterpart. The greatest challenge is in describing what the cognitive things are that exist in the MI community. We have very, very brilliant individuals. Our soldiers are absolutely on the high-end scales of cognitive abilities. And, you know, the Army's based on being able to move, shoot, and communicate. So an infantryman refines their ability to maneuver and shoot and communicate. But we're also asking the military intelligence professional to develop intellectually, to use critical thinking skills. So the big thing that's hard to get across to everyone else is the time it takes to be able to develop those can't all be done during a duty day. I think we leverage. We give soldiers more things that they have to do on their off-duty time to improve in the self-development domain than we ever do in any of the other branches. When I leave work as an infantryman, I'll go work out some more. I may go grab my civilian weapon and go out to a range. I mean, I can do a few things to improve what I'm doing, but we're really expecting that linguist to go home and spend another hour each day working through learning a language capability. Our expectation of a young 35 Quebec in this new cyber domain is that they're going home and tinkering with their home router to continue to develop their skills. Our expectations of self-development amongst MI professionals is higher than it is in the other branches. So it's not as easy. It's why we argue for proficiency pay for particular specialties, because we're adding to that basic requirement of just being a soldier that I think is a little bit different than many of the traditional combat arms MOSs.
Up until now, most of the questions that I've asked have been about leadership, your leadership within the Military Intelligence Corps, within the Army, but I would like to give you a chance to talk about your experiences during the Cold War.
The sense I had growing up in, what sounds old, the 60s and the 70s, was at a period of height of Cold War. This view of Reagan and our strategic defense initiative. It was this very cold relationship between us and our adversaries. Movies would always give you this view of the Russian adversary in a particular way, and the feeling that you had was it was all about Europe. When I decided to head into a particular MOS, going through DLI, where I had a Czech instructors, I had Slovak instructors. You had visions in your head that they were spies from their nations who were there to figure out who you were. It was this sense of Cold War spy espionage from the movies that you had as you were going through the training part. I went to Goodfellow after that, and all of the material that you used to learn your trade and craft, for me, was focused on the Eastern Bloc and those particular adversaries. You were trained from the very beginning to think of anyone of Eastern European, for all those countries, as being the enemy. So why wouldn't you logically want to go to Europe? I was disappointed as the top graduate in my class that I was going to have to go to a tactical formation. Everyone else was getting to go to Field Station Augsburg or Berlin or these other places that the instructors had given you a sense of this was the center of the universe. I'm very glad I didn't. 1st Armored Division had, I think, looking back, the task of being a road bump, a speed bump if the Russians came across the Iron Curtain into West Germany. We spent all of our time preparing for that eventuality. Families were very resilient. We had something, the code word was Lariat Advance. When you heard that, it meant get into work with all your kit. You may be going out to the field for the afternoon, or the longest one I can remember is we spent 3.5 weeks in the field with no notice. That was the culture of being able to instantly respond to the adversary. You were trained to know about the targets. I became an expert in field artillery traffic for the 1st and 4th Czechoslovak People's Army. I could sit on the border, hear an artillery mission, break the grid out in my head, and send in a tactical report on where that round was going to land. This very tactical sense of, hey, here's what the adversary is going to do. In contrast, as I mentioned, they would let us work on the listening posts, where you're trying to see where they're moving. Are they massing forces along the border? This operational and strategic side of the business. Everything, though, with the focus of that wall's up. I can recall I left in 87, and when the wall fell in, I think it was 89, I was surprised. We didn't act like the wall was going to ever fall. If there were intelligence indications, we weren't sharing that amongst ourselves up through 1987. It was just the same in my mind as it was in the late 60s, other than when the wall was built in Berlin. To give you a sense of that, they would encourage you to go into East Berlin. You'd put on your dress uniform, and you were allowed, under post-war arrangement, to go into the eastern sector. So you'd go through Checkpoint Charlie, You'd be followed around by a bunch of Russian soldiers. You'd tour the war memorials. You'd do a little shopping, and then you'd come back across the border. You'd have to get flag orders to travel on the road in Helmstedt Autobahn from West Germany to West Berlin, going through Russian checkpoints with notions in your head of, hey, they're going to drag me out of this car and drag me off somewhere.
Just because you were Army or?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
Or
yeah,
U.S. Army?
yes,
So not necessarily because you were military intelligence?
no. Although there were ways where you knew that you were known by name, whether it was through communications or other methods. I can recall at the time being mentioned by name as part of something. I'm sure we've declassified it at this point, but still this notion of yes, they knew who the intelligence folks were, but that for me wasn't the greatest, didn't feel that part of the threat. I remember attack helicopters moving towards the vehicles on the Autobahn. I was convinced just for fun, maybe it was exercises, but you had this sense of tension everywhere that you went. So you focused on preparation in every exercise, every course that you did. I took a field sanitation course to be the field sanitation NCO because you have to be able to dig latrines in the field. All for the purpose of what do you do when that call comes that says, hey, we're all moving towards the border. Families participated in evacuation exercises on what we would do if we were going to do a NEO to get all of the family members out of Europe. Just an absolutely fascinating time. Within the Military Intelligence Corps, that was our time of the Combat Electronic Warfare Intelligence Battalion, the CWE Battalion. There were a lot of ASA folks in my organization when I first got there in December of 1984. I remember the first PT test. We were in civilian clothes. We got into two lines. We exchanged PT cards. We were given an about face. We filled out the PT cards. We were given an about face, and we were dismissed. So that was my first PT test in an ASA cultured formation. Within a month, we were Army again. So I have no idea, because I didn't serve in ASA, whether that was widespread, but that was my first indication of, wow, these intelligence units and these maneuver units are new. This is something that we're trying to work through. I don't know the start point of CWE, but CWE became what I did for the majority of my career, all the way until being a battalion sergeant major on the tactical side. It was how do you take each of these single source skills and apply that for a commander. First Armored Division got all of the new equipment in the Cold War timeframe. We were not at want in Europe. Lots of expensive tracks. We didn't mind the motor pool because that was our method of getting to war and surviving on the battlefield was, your truck being functional. I owned a Deuce and a half that clearly was Vietnam era. That was my vehicle. It had my name on it. I was responsible for all the maintenance. It was my way of being able to get to and from being able to do my job for the organization out there in the field. You can't do intel till you can get to the place that you need to do intel. Was kind of the mindset. So, when folks describe we waste individuals' time in a motor pool, just didn't feel it that way. It was this view of that's what everyone does. You own your equipment, your ability to get there. You have to have cooks in your organization. You have to tow the mobile kitchen trailer out to the field. You have to bring all of your generators to set up a talk. That was just the culture that existed within the Military Intelligence Corps that I found in CWE that really defined me for my whole career. I kept many of the permanent restricted area maps of East Germany as 5th Corps was leaving Frankfurt to move to Heidelberg when I was there later in the 90s. I found all sorts of material that was all now unclassified that we were supposed to take out to the dumpsters. So I asked the commander, is there any of this that we can we can keep for ourselves. So I have some of that material that reminds me of how I felt this tension as a young soldier. That's what motivated me each and every day and brought to life that military service was something that always had the expectation of danger. When 9/11 happened, all of us who were on active duty had to make a decision in the Army whether we were going to accept what the nation needed us to do from that particular point. And I don't make any value judgments of anyone, but everyone had to decide for themselves. And there was a lot of Cold War structure, which was all about preparing for war rather than doing war. And everyone had to make that decision for themselves. And everyone did for whatever reasons, and that's absolutely super. Quality of service isn't affected by whether you served in war or you didn't. But the Army at that particular moment was then going to ask us to do something that we had only been preparing for. So everyone had to make a mental adjustment. And I tie much of that same feeling I felt on September 12th with how I felt back sitting 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers from the Czech border, listening to that artilleryman. Pretty amazing, where things have come. I watch with great interest nationally our relationship with Russia. Those who have been serving since the 80s have a different view of that adversary than the young American that I meet in the dining facility here. You're a byproduct of your history. Because my mom was born in 40, and I remember her telling me she grew up or was born in Washington, D.C., and would talk about blackouts. She put a sense of what World War II as a kid meant. And I think that probably shaped my view a little bit of how I approached the Cold War threat. Back to where we started, I never had any design to join the Army. It was the movie Stripes and a little card for the Army in a magazine or something that I just happened to fill out and put in a mailbox. That started the whole adventure. No, wanted to be like my grandfather who served in the war. Very interesting at how I ended up at this particular point that I am.
Right, so you'll retire with 35 years?
34 years active duty and 1 year in the IRR when I was an Air Force dependent down in Key West, Florida. With absolutely no regrets. The young sergeant that was driving me around says, "Is there anything that you would do differently?" And so the answer is always no, because you don't control your environment if you're doing this the right way. Would my experience be different if I tried to do something different? Absolutely. Would my experience be different if I still went about it with the same approach? Absolutely. So you can have regrets, or you can realize that your attitude's the only thing that you can control. I stay excited about going to work every day. And I'll leave it a pretty good spot. I decided in retirement I'm going to go back to my wife's home state of Montana. I am not going to do intelligence or cyber when I retire. This degree I talked about was as an accountant. I'm going to sit for my first exam in the CPA exam in July. And I'm going to go back to Montana and work as an accountant for 10 years, switch on fixed income, and just kind of get old. It'd be pretty fun.
Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to touch upon?
No, I think what I'd like to do with you is if there's anything that really has spurred what you or Sergeant Major are interested in doing, I'd love to just kind of have an email exchange for my last year. Had to make a decision whether I wanted to really push into INSCOM or NSA. I feel a connection back to our schoolhouse here and back to the home of Intel, so that's kind of why I asked to have some interaction with the team here as we push forward.
Well, it's been very enjoyable.
Well, thank you.
Like